Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are running just a few minutes behind because of there's a visitor in Los Angeles who lives in Washington, D.C. in this big White House who has startled traffic this morning. So we're waiting a couple of our commissioners to get here. So we apologize for that, but we'll start shortly.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the September meeting of the Sheriff Civilian Oversight Commission. In August, we had our hiatus, so we're now resuming. And just before we start, I know that people will be probably trickling in with the traffic, but I'd like to just invite you to take a moment, a meditative moment, and just be here now. Feel your feet on the floor. Come from long distances, even from the East Coast, so we welcome those visitors. And so I'm going to ring our bell and we'll just have a meditative moment. Before we fully come to order and do the pledge, I'd like to highlight some of the changes that are taking effect in how we go about doing our business at our meetings. We're starting them today, and the goal is to ensure that everyone who comes has a fair opportunity to express themselves at the podium, to give their opinions in public commentary, that our presenters have an opportunity to speak and give their reports uninterrupted. And there's often a lot of significant issues that we do, and our more recent experiences have shown us that we don't have enough time to do the commission's business, which is the community's business. So what we're doing is in 2018, we made a decision to extend the public comment from 2 minutes to 3 minutes. And like we've been doing that for several months now. And we determined that we don't have enough time for everyone to have comment and also to do our work. So now that we know that after that experiment, we're going to go back to 2 minutes per speaker with a maximum of 6 minutes per person for public comment. Really want to invite the public, to everyone who's here in the audience, to help us conform to these new rules that have been necessitated in terms of us conducting our business. Because of safety concerns, we've decided that signs larger than 8.5 by 11 will no longer be permitted within the boardroom. There's 8.5 by 11, it's about this size, perfectly acceptable. People who come, if they have signs for other purposes, they can leave it at the table at the front, and then they can pick up their signs on their way out. And this has a lot to do with safety concerns. Our goal is to have to do our business in the safest manner possible, with the most respect possible. And so, for example, one of the things that I'm going to have to do is, if people are disruptive, or if someone is disruptive, for example, like interrupting the speaker, I'll give a warning and ask for that to cease. If it continues, I'm going to have to ask them to leave, hopefully leave on their own volition and come back later. If they don't leave and they continue to be disruptive, we'll have to ask security to very gently escort them out. Again, we've had some experiences now. We've been here, is it 2.5 years? 2.5 years. So we want to get better at doing what we do, and we really invite everyone to, while you have a lot of opinions, differing opinions, conflictual opinions, if we just take the time to listen to each other and allow people to speak, that would really go a long way for us to having respectful and efficient meetings. So I'm going to ask, yes?
Madam Chair, I'm supportive of all these changes, but the last time I think we did vote on it, since it was something that we were kind of putting into place for a longer term. Do you not think we need to do that this time to establish that?
Yeah, this issue was discussed at our December 2018 meeting down in San Pedro. Oh. There actually was not a vote on it. It was just by acclamation.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. I don't think we need to vote. I think it's been, we've reached these conclusions by evidence, experience, and real-time data of the interference that we have in doing our work.
Correct. It is at the discretion of the chair.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, thank you. So now I'd like to ask Commissioner Rubin to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Say a special good morning to all the commissioners. You're here, back in our seats. I know that the search, and also the Sheriff's Department is here, and the OIG, and County Council, the staff of the COC. None of us can do this work without each other. So big appreciation for continuing to show up and engage. Okay, that's good. I'd like to turn us to agenda item number 1, which is the approval of the June 25th, 2019 meeting minutes. Is there any commissioner discussion on the minutes?
I move that we approve the minutes from July.
Okay. Is there any public comment on the minutes? Nope? Okay. Terrific. So I'll call for a vote. Everyone in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much. We have a special presentation today, agenda item 2A. RAND is here to talk about their plan to study the LASD deputy subgroups during last July 2018 COC meeting. Sheriff McDonald provided the commission with an update on the steps taken to address the potential existence of deputy subgroups within LASD. He also reported that a comprehensive study would be conducted, which would allow outside experts to study the department. 1 year later, we're still grappling with the issue of deputy subgroups, and it is an issue that the commission takes very seriously. We have an ad hoc committee that's researching the issue. The OIG is investigating the issue. And today we're going to hear from the RAND Corporation, who've been contracted by the county to conduct a study on this issue. And I'd like to point out that there is cooperation from LASD and the union in terms of this study that is beginning now. We're joined by 2 of the team from the RAND Corporation who will be providing us with an update regarding its study and what's going to happen and how it will be rolled out. I want to welcome social policy researcher Ms. Dion Barnes-Proby and associate policy researcher Mr. Samuel Peterson. You have the floor.
Thank you. It'll just be me presenting, and then we'll bring everyone in for questions or comments. So I'd like to thank you all for inviting us here today to present on our research study to better understand deputy subgroups within the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. My name is Sam Peterson. I'm an associate policy researcher, and I'm joined by my colleagues, James Anderson, Dion Barnes-Proby, and Catherine Bauskill. So I'd like to briefly give you a general overview about what RAND is, what we do, and then give you a couple examples of some research projects that we think are either fitting in terms of their high-profile nature or the subject matter, and give you a couple examples of findings we made or recommendations we made during those studies. So, thank you. So we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan public policy research institution. So a lot of our work focuses on improving decision-making, improving policy-making through research and analysis. So we really hope to improve decision-making processes and policies by being objective and conducting rigorous research studies. We think this is important for making sure that policies are well thought out and that their effects are well understood. And because of our policy focus, we often end up working on projects with, high profiles. I have a couple examples here. So some of our work in the military has focused on gender identity and sexual orientation. And while certainly not relevant to this project, it did focus on helping the military understand subpopulations within its ranks and trying to understand the implications for the military's mission with regard to their policies, military cohesion, and military readiness. So we made recommendations about potential policy impacts that the military sort of considered when they were considering implementing Don't Ask, Don't Tell and allowing transgender troops to serve openly. A little bit more relevant to this subject, another high-profile project that we had focused on evaluating the effects of a collaborative agreement in Cincinnati, where the goals were to improve police-community relations, reduce social tension, and avoid litigation, following a collaborative agreement and riots in the city. So there we conducted research to evaluate progress toward those goals, and we conducted research on bias in traffic stops, use of force, and we observed citizen perceptions and police officer perceptions of the progress that was being made. Our conclusions there revealed that there was substantial progress toward meeting the goals, but there was also a discrepancy between perceptions of bias and observed bias in traffic stops. So we made recommendations to, revealed that, part of this discrepancy was due to different types of policing in certain communities and different types of policing by certain officers. So we made recommendations about different strategies for policing certain communities and recommendations to improve training. I also wanted to briefly highlight some of our justice-related work in LA County. So our police workforce planning and recruiting research focuses on recognizing that short-term hiring impacts policing long-term. So it's important to make sure the applicant pools are reflective of the criteria for the position, and we review processes and procedures for recruitment and hiring, and make recommendations for improvement. So an example here, we developed a scoring criteria for the LAPD to use to better prioritize recruits who are most likely to make it through the hiring process. Additionally, we've done some work on the impact of Prop 47. This project was a workload analysis and metrics development project, so we made recommendations about how to better evaluate the effects of Prop 47 on county workload, county budgets, as well as recommendations for collecting more appropriate data to evaluate the effects of Prop 47. And another recent example is we focused on evaluating reentry programs focused on transitional housing and supportive mental health services. So when we turn to this study, I think it's important to be clear about what our goals are. I've listed our main goals on this slide, with the primary goal being to develop a comprehensive understanding of deputy subgroups. And within this, we also recognize that it's important to understand the broader organizational climate and culture within LASD. So we'd like to understand policies, procedures, people's attitudes, values, and in terms of understanding groups, we'd like to understand a little bit more about what their purpose is, what role do they serve, what are the risks and benefits associated with them. Second, we have the goal of understanding experiences and perceptions of community members. We certainly think, understanding how people perceive the issue of deputy subgroups and their thoughts and experiences about this topic certainly merit a little further investigation and trying to better understand people's perceptions. Additionally, I think within all of this, we'd like to understand more about organizational policies and practices that might be relevant to subgroups, as well as the rights of deputies who are involved in groups and associate with one another. And then finally, we plan to summarize our findings and develop recommendations that fit to match what we have found in our data collection and information gathering during the project. So I think for us, we're approaching this project with the intention of being incredibly open and independent and balanced in our approach. We want to make sure that we explore, a variety of perspectives from a variety of different sources. And we obviously are aware of, different perceptions that it may or may not exist, but we want to explore each of these in their own right and try to understand them a little bit more fully. And because of this, I think we're characterizing the study as exploratory descriptive research. So we're keeping a fairly open process. We're not necessarily limiting ourselves to one theoretical perspective or one approach to understanding what the information that we collect here. And to do this, we think we need a multidisciplinary research team. So in addition to myself, we have a variety of PhD level researchers, including criminologists, anthropologists, social psychologists, social policy researchers, public health researchers, and legal scholars involved in our research team. This project is going to be guided by the following research questions. So this is how we'll frame our approach to data collection to begin with. We'll allow these questions to evolve as they may, but to begin with, we really want to understand what groups exist, what is their purpose, including the activities, the attitudes, the values that may exist within groups within the department. And to better understand their role within the department, try to understand why they form, why they may dissolve, and the implications that has on the department. Additionally, we seek to understand how subgroups are viewed inside the department from a variety of perspectives. So we plan to conduct research at all levels of the LASD. Additionally, in our interviews and our policy review, we certainly are going to explore how groups can possibly be managed, what relevant policies and practices there are to help better frame this issue in a way that's productive. So, and additionally, we want to understand the community and understand how their concerns might be addressed. So we'll be engaging in a variety of research activities to do this. A lot of our work is going to focus, at least at the beginning, is going to focus on semi-structured interviews with department personnel and community members. So what we mean by semi-structured interviews is that we have a general set of questions or topic areas that we'd like to discover during an interview, but we'd also like to let people be able to freely explain their perspective and explain their experiences. And that allows us to go to, or uncover different areas or different topics that we might not have thought of beforehand. So we'll be conducting interviews with command staff, middle management, and line staff, and then we'll be conducting interviews and focus groups with community members to better understand their experiences and perceptions. And then followed by interviews, we will be completing a survey of LASD personnel. We're planning to use our interview results to better frame the survey in terms of what might be most important or most relevant to this subject. And we ultimately hope to keep the survey as focused as possible and as relevant as possible. And then along the way, we'll be requesting documents, requesting policies, and conducting a literature review of the academic research to better frame this issue. We think to do all this that we have to be really clear about the type of confidentiality protections we can provide as a research organization. Our purpose is not to attribute blame or identify individuals. That's not often the purpose of research. So, we think this is important for ensuring that people feel comfortable talking to us and feel free to speak to their experience. So two main protections involved in keeping research subjects protected include voluntariness and confidentiality. So participation will remain voluntary, and we won't let anyone know who has participated and who has not. So we also don't plan to record specific names or specific information, and we will remove any identifiable information that gets collected in our notes. And then lastly, we'll be reporting our findings overall. So we won't be talking about specific situations or specific locations. And additionally, we have safeguards to protect confidentiality. So all data that we collect will be property of RAND. We have a variety of internal processes for ensuring that data do not get accessed by outside parties. So we have a variety of immediate next steps that we're planning to take very shortly. One of our first steps is going to be to conduct station visits to explain the study in person. This will allow us to, sort of take some mystery away from what we're doing, and also, get some feedback about our approach and what types of things might be more well received than other. With the goal of increasing participation in the study. Around the same time, we'd also like to begin interviews with command staff, followed by interviews with middle management and line staff. And then again, we'll use those interviews to develop a survey and conduct a survey to LASD personnel. And then along the way, we'll be reviewing policies, reviewing practices, reviewing manuals as relevant. Sort of a parallel task will be the community aspect of this project. So we'll be asking for referrals to community members from a variety of sources. We'll be conducting our own research to find different community perspectives and different community leaders. And our goal is to get a diverse array of perspectives included in the study. We've also developed some communication channels for people to learn more about the project, reach out to us about, with any questions that they might have, including, a website, which we hope will be up hopefully by the end of this week. We have a phone line and an email for the project established, and we'll be eventually developing a Facebook page. And then our next step after that recruitment phase will be to begin conducting interviews with community members. So I apologize for those of you in the back. It's probably a little hard to read, but this is our plan for the project. So right now we're in the phase of building support, meeting with stakeholders, doing presentations like this, and making plans so that we're able to execute the study and making sure that everyone's on the same page. So again, we listed out, station visits and interviews with command staff are our first task, followed by community recruitment and interviews and focus groups in the community. Then we'll be also conducting interviews with middle management and line staff at LASD, followed by a survey, and then we will write our analyses, create our findings, and send our report to quality assurance review, which is an internal and external review of our methods, findings, conclusions, limitations, and essentially replicates a peer review process. This is RAND's internal process for quality. And then at the end, we'll have one final public report, which will be released to our website, and we will conduct both government, stakeholder, and community briefings of our results. So I ran through a lot of that very fast. I'm happy to take questions. I have listed on there our project email for people in the audience who would like to ask us some further questions after this. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I'd like to... Thank you very much. I'd like to open it up for some questions from the commissioners first. But my first question is, you talk about not focusing on specificity. I know you have confidentiality that you must respect, of course. But could you explain that? Because it seems to me that this is an inquiry like this is going to land in a lot of specificity in the stories that will be told and the information that was going to be communicated. So can you illuminate me a little bit more on that, about how you will handle, because you will hear very specific things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think one part of that will be redacting simple information that can be replaced easily. So a specific person's name with just deputy name, or just a generic placeholder for someone's name. Another part of that will be sort of categorizing what is being described to us as we type our notes up. So changing something from, a specific incident to a characterization of that incident. So we still have the information that we would need from that description of an incident, but we wouldn't necessarily need all of the specifics, if that's helpful. And then we'll be sort of aggregating all of these characteristics into a report that gives a sense of the variation, the variety of different experiences that people told to us, if that helps.
Right. And so if you are privileged to hearing about a crime that was committed, how do you handle that?
So
Any kind of allegations of criminal behavior, how do you handle that in your project?
So I think there are two ways. So we aren't necessarily required to report on criminal conduct. That's not something that our research process requires. That's something that our contract excludes us from. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we would be unable to report that people had reported crimes to us, if that makes sense.
So that would be included. Somehow you would include it in the report.
I don't think we would leave that out on purpose. No.
And you have no other legal obligation because of the confidentiality issues to go any further, to alert or bring any of that to light.
I believe so. So I think if someone reports a crime to us, we'll certainly refer them to the appropriate organization. I think, we're not established for the process of, producing or working through complaints or verifying complaints and things like that. James, anything I missed?
I can touch on that briefly. So RAND, as a research organization, we're governed by the Institutional Review Board regulations, which generally require confidentiality and protection for research subjects. And there's a long history to protect research subjects involved in any kind of research. And as an organization that contracts with the federal government, we're bound by a variety of human subject protections requirements. In general, those require confidentiality, and we're not an investigatory body or an organization that investigates specific allegations. Now, there are a few exceptions to that when, for example, allegations of child maltreatment or endangerment in certain very narrow circumstances we're required to report. But in general, we are not required to report. And in fact, we are not permitted to by the Human Subject Protections Committee's rules.
Great, thanks for clarifying that. I just wanted to clarify it for the record. Now I'm going to open it up to questions from the commissioners.
Thank you. A couple of questions. The first is the use of your term exploratory descriptive research. Can you expand on that just a little bit so we and the public know what you're talking about?
So briefly, it's more of a open process than we typically engage in. So while we have research questions, we have specific subjects that we would like to collect data on. We aren't necessarily limited by one particular framework or evaluating one particular question. So we're hoping to get a range or a variety of things. That's sort of the exploratory part. And the descriptive just means that we won't be, inferring any type of causality. We're essentially describing the things as we, receive them. We'll be synthesizing the different sources of information and trying to triangulate things. But it'll essentially be a description of what the data we collect.
Okay, so another way perhaps of saying that is that you don't go into this with any preconceived notions and you let the information come out as it may.
Correct.
Is that fair?
Correct. So following a structured process, we sort of aim to seek the full range of experiences or perceptions or, attitudes.
Okay. And my second question is, what are your tools to evaluate credibility or biases. I mean, it's one thing to gather information and then synthesize it and come up with a report and recommendations. But certainly in the past year, this commission and the public have heard numerous instances of the community talking about the effect of deputy cliques or subgroups or gangs or whatever we're calling them. And the sheriff's department more recently from the current sheriff saying, you know, this doesn't really exist. So if you get that kind of information, how do you assess where, I don't want to use the word truth, but how do you assess that kind of information?
I think some of that will be covered in the descriptive process. So just laying out what are the different perspectives and what do people feel about this issue, and sort of trying to understand why they have the certain perspective that they do. So sort of, you know, that's part of the descriptive process, is sort of laying everything out there. In terms of verifying or, you know, understanding, you know, verifying how truthful people are being with us, I think that, you know, any one interview or any one data point is just that for us. I think, you know, we'll be collecting data from a lot of different people. So to the extent that some explanations agree more or less with other explanations, we can sort of try to figure that out. And then also we can try to use a little bit of triangulation by using different methodologies and different sources of information to sort of understand the weight of different perspectives, if that makes sense. But really a lot of it will be sort of explaining the variation in perspectives and attitudes and experiences.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Following up on Commissioner Gigan's description, your note on slide 9 says you'll avoid recording names and specific information, e.g. descriptions of tattoos. So how do you do that? We all know there are Vikings that exist. There's a Viking tattoo. I mean, why not name the specific group? We've also had previous studies in which names of particular groups have been identified. So I see very little value in just saying there's this tattoo 1, tattoo 2, and we have no description. I see very little value in just this receiving just a narrative of the history, the context, and here's what people think about. And if it remains, I'm just very leery of the fact that we have a sheriff that says it doesn't exist. So why would a group say, to talk to you means we would be existing? So they avoid talking to you because we don't exist.
So I think, you know, the idea about not recording specifics about tattoos gets back to confidentiality. So if someone tells us about a tattoo in confidentiality, you know, that could potentially be used to identify them as a research participant, which
why don't we
avoid.
identify the tattoo? How do I identify the subgroup? I mean, I can't imagine just saying tattoo 1 and tattoo 2 without putting a name to it, or without referencing tattoo 1 has whatever the tattoos are. It just doesn't seem like it helps.
I mean, I think one of the purposes is to develop a more global understanding of the groups that exist. So certainly, you know, it might not be revealed through an investigation or, you know, the ways in which that has been revealed in the past. But, you know, I think in order to get people to talk to us or to talk about these groups, it's important to, you know, that's not necessarily our purpose in this research project. It's trying to understand the reasons why groups develop and the purpose that they serve in the organization. You know, if you look at the history of how groups have been mentioned over the last 40 years, I think, you know, there's a desire to understand why that is and why groups reappear.
Agreed. Yeah. But at this point in time, though, following Commissioner Rubin's notes or comments, I mean, there's been allegations from the community and allegations from even within the command staff. It just seems to me you need to address those. I mean, you can't just be getting narratives from people and then coming up with a conclusion that has so little weight or value, at least not for me. It just seems to me it needs to be a more directed study that here's certain allegations that have already arisen. You don't need to do that much information about the subgroups because just 5 or 6 years ago, which Judge Bonner was also part of, there's already been that long study. It just seems to me you just keep adding on to it. And at the same time, that particular study identifies the subgroups. So how do you segue from that to suddenly they become anonymous?
Well, I think there are other avenues for that type of approach. I mean, I think the studies you're referring to were not necessarily research studies, if I'm correct.
No, they were essentially community policing commission studies in which community members got together to review essentially the tattoos and different subgroups. I realize it is not an academic research study, and yours is much more that, but I'm just truly trying to see what the value is when you come down to a conclusion, and then maybe I'm wrong, but I'm running conclusions through my head, and I said we spent all that time, and I already know what the conclusions are.
May I address that issue? Commissioner Tolentino,
Yeah.
as you know, back in April, this body directed me to investigate, and what you're hearing described is not an investigation, and I share all your concerns about it. As you know, in July, I wasn't at this meeting, and the reason was I was before the board asking them to provide me with changes to my ordinance and subpoena power to conduct the investigation that you asked me to do, and I plan to do it, assuming the board provides the tools necessary, which I hope they will. And that, I think, will address exactly what you're talking about. The study came about from what happened 2 years ago when the department was not investigating, and they still don't, individual instances of misconduct in a manner that actually dug in the way you described regarding secret societies. They would not compel fellow secret society members to provide statements against their fellow members in an investigation where it was relevant. And that caused me, in private, to say, that's it, we're going to a subpoena power approach. I'm going to find some subpoena power somewhere, and I'm going to get started. And that triggered, with county counsel's assistance, a plan to do this study, because at the time, they wanted a basis to be able to be prepared in court to support whatever policy the sheriff's department put in place regarding them, and the sheriff wanted a reason to move forward. Obviously, 2 years later, with a very slow process, we're in a totally different place. We have a sheriff who goes out and publicly, as has been pointed out twice, says there are no secret societies, only station tattoos. That's an amazing statement given the mountain of evidence that has been presented publicly. And I do think, although it's crazy, the idea of having Rand come in and answer that question, if none other, in response to what the sheriff has to say, is a fine one, but it's got nothing to do with what I'm going to do. I'm not backing down. I'm not slowing down. I will, as quickly as I can, do what this commission has charged me with. I wish Rand luck in their process. I hope the Sheriff's Department cooperates, and I hope they're successful. But we will move forward with an investigation that meets the criteria that you're talking about.
And yours to be running concurrently with Rand?
As soon as I'm given the power to do it.
It just seems like the use of the resources is bothersome, I guess, in my mind. But I thank you, Max, for the clarification. I appreciate that. That was what I was thinking of with the RAND study. Well, we'll see what happens. I will reserve conclusions until I guess I see a little bit more about what happens. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's all we ask.
Commissioner.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to follow up and ask the Inspector General, when you said crazy, what were you referring to? Do you believe it's crazy to be conducting an analysis like this, or do you think that it's sort of doomed from the start?
No, I think it's crazy that we have an elected sheriff stating publicly that there are no secret societies, only station tattoos. Given what we all know publicly, given what happened with the Banditos, that is common knowledge. What happened with the Jump Out Boys, what a federal judge said about the white supremacy or white nationalism of the Vikings, about people the sheriff knows within his inner circle to be inked, and yet we won't talk about them publicly because they're secret, and yet the sheriff denies there is some secrecy. I mean, that's crazy, and given that incredible situation we find ourselves in, I think the RAND approach is a good one because of the need to address that. I was recently upbraided by county public information officers for not going on talk shows and talking about these things that the sheriff says publicly. And I explained that's not my job. My job is to collect information and evidence, do investigations, to get down to actual facts, not to be part of a Twitter conversation. But RAND is positioned in an academic way to answer that question of is the sheriff correct when he says there are no secret societies. And I wish we didn't have to have that conversation again, but for 50 years the Sheriff's Department has not addressed this problem, and management has actually supported them by enforcing a code of silence. That's a 50-year problem. It didn't arise just with our new sheriff. It's been here for a long time, so I think our approach has to be multi-pronged, has to be unrelenting, has to be thorough and complete, and I share all your concerns, but I welcome this process, and it is my hope that as it starts to unfold, deputies will participate because they will see their opportunity to tell a full story to RAND, not a selected story, but a full story, and RAND will actually be able to give us an intelligent look at the bigger problem that no sheriff can deny, and that will allow the department to do what they could on their own right now, which is pass a policy that addresses this problem. And we're still coming. And it's in their interest to take care of it before we come, because we can fix it, but it's a much more brutal and unpleasant process for all involved. And I do not want this to be done on the back of a bunch of deputies who joined an organization that had this baked into it. I would much rather see the management of this organization fix the problem and then us come do cleanup in the way that you described. But either way, we're coming.
Okay. This question is addressed perhaps at the two of you or others, but is this then a county contract that RAND has to do this? Is that?
Yes.
That is correct.
Yes.
From county council, I believe, is the official folks running it. And again, that came about because of the conflict between me and the sheriff 2 years ago, which county council stepped in to try to come up with a resolution or a step to get us in something that we all wanted to move forward with. And so county council became sort of the folks guiding it.
Okay. So then I guess the last question is, I was troubled by a sense, and perhaps this is my misunderstanding, but a sense that there's a lack of understanding or appreciation on your part that you're talking about illegality. When you said we're going to measure the problems and the benefits, you don't measure the benefits of cancer or some MS-13 gang. So I'm afraid that will lead you, given the lack of tools to really get illegal conduct, to kind of a whitewashing of what is occurring with deputy gangs here, to say we're going to measure benefits of this and not have the tools to really bring out to life all the cancerous, stuff that's out there without the tools to do that. So there are limits to research, and I appreciate research, but don't you think that there are some dangers in doing a study like this without the tools to really do that, sir?
I certainly recognize your concern, and I should clarify, what we mean by benefits is not benefits for policy or benefits for the community in a way that I think would be typically, considered. I think what we mean by benefits is what is appealing about joining a group. What do they get from joining it? If there was no positive aspect to it for a deputy, why would they join? Especially given the context, the current context. So that's what we meant by benefits. I don't necessarily think we would make a policy stance on benefits, but I think it's important to understand why people would join or not join a deputy group. And that's kind of where that risks and benefits came from.
Okay.
So,
Can you wait 1 second? Our other commissioner here in line.
Thank you for addressing the commission about the research-based study. I just had a question, and it really, I think, builds on Commissioner Vera's comments, which is you said that RAND is going to essentially deconstruct the subgroups and try to determine why they arise and what purpose they serve in the organization, which seems very internally focused on the Sheriff's Department. But really the concern that I have regarding internal subgroups or gangs in the Sheriff's Department is how they impact police community relations, and just as important, how they impact the criminal justice system in Los Angeles. Will RAND address that aspect of the groups? Because I think those who work in the criminal justice system don't have any question whether or not there are internal subgroups or gangs in the Sheriff's Department, but rarely is the outward focused question addressed: how does this impact the quality of justice and the quality of policing in our community?
Yeah, certainly we will consider, other governmental agencies, other governmental organizations. We may, interview a variety of leaders of various various governmental agencies. And we also certainly intend to explore the effect on police community relations, public trust, and we'll do so through interviews and focus groups with community members. And we can give you more details about that process if you would like that.
Thank you.
Following up on Commissioner Kennedy's comments, are you also going to look at different police departments to see if this particular problem exists?
I think
does it exist like with the LAPD or with the Riverside County folks?
I think that's certainly a great question. We certainly would be up for approaching them to see if they'd like to participate in an interview. I don't know that we would be able to get down to as much detail with other departments given the timeline that we're on. I think it's a little bit of an open area in law enforcement in general in terms of what is known about this subject.
All right.
So,
looking at slide 11, your project plan, do you have a rough timeline of when all these tasks will be completed?
Yeah, so we're aiming to finish the project in 12 months, and in approximately 12 months, and I think we'd like to have the interviews completed by early winter, fielding the survey in the spring, and then be able to write up our findings and go to internal review by early summer.
All right, thank you.
Okay, and when will we be able to get a report, an interim report, progress report from you in this 1-year process?
So I think a sort of an official interim report probably would slow us down a little bit. So the way we would have to approach that is, do a month or two of quality assurance on that internal report to make sure that the conclusions and the findings in that report are appropriate for where we stand. And since this is a little bit of a moving target, we're going to be very flexible in our approach. I don't think we were planning on doing an interim report, but we can certainly give progress updates, and county council is sort of monitoring our progress on the timeline.
Okay. So we will hear about progress updates from county council?
Well, I can't speak for them, but we definitely are sort of working with county council to make sure they're
So I would
informed.
invite, we are administering the contract, but I would invite the COC ad hoc to have direct communication with RAND so that there's no intermediary.
And the key difference there is between, we're happy to tell you what we've been doing and the progress we've made. We can't offer any conclusions, and that's sort of, we can't offer any substantive conclusions until we've done the research.
No, I understand that. I think there would be some interest in knowing, are you on track? Are we really going to get this report? When will we get this report? Next September? Is that it? 12 months?
Roughly.
Roughly 12 months. Well, that's why we like to have some progress reports on, well, it's delayed, or we're not going to hear, you're not going to have anything until January, or gee, it's going so quickly, we're going to have it by June. So that kind of thing, we would welcome some shared information, not to interfere with you doing your work to get to the conclusions that I know have to be validated, but so that we know that this is happening and that you're on track.
Certainly, we can keep you apprised of all that. I just
Great.
wanted to be clear that we
Right.
couldn't provide sort of a preview of our conclusions until
Right.
the research finished.
Understood.
Sam, so I know you mentioned earlier that there will be some community involvement in this. Can you just perhaps highlight again, if there are members of the community who are here today or who are listening to us online, how they can get involved in this process and in which manner in which they may contact you?
Sure. So, for general questions about the project, we will have a website, we'll have an email address that they can send questions to, and we'll have an 800 number. That'll all be on our website where people can, reach out to us and ask questions. In terms of involving people in the study, I think our plan is to work with a variety of stakeholders to recruit participants for research. So we want to be pretty strategic about that. We're planning to work with the Oversight Commission, the Sheriff's Department, and other community groups that we find along the way to recruit key community members and people who we think have a diversity of perspectives on the topic. And I know,
But the number and the website aren't up yet, right?
correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think we have one more draft to get to that. I think we're aiming for Friday.
So when it is up, how will you push that information out?
So we'll certainly let you all know about the website, where to find it. I think we also plan on announcing it through eventually a Facebook page. So I think and I should mention that we aren't cleared through our IRB to begin the community aspect of the research. That's we're going to be reviewing that very soon. So we're probably a month out from beginning. So we'll have to approach that a little bit cautiously as
All right.
well.
Thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Rubin?
Yes, it's been stated that the Sheriff's Department, the sheriff has indicated cooperation with the study and authorized his department to cooperate with your study. What is the kind of assurance that you have from the Sheriff's Department? Just a word, a letter in writing? What do you have in that regard?
Yeah, so we've been working with the department, and they've been supportive of the project along the way. I think right now they're reviewing a statement of letter of support to push out to the department to announce the project, and that's under review this week, I believe.
Okay, the sheriff's representative here, but when is your expectation that letter will go out?
I think that's really up to them. I think for us, what we're more interested in is getting out and visiting the stations and explaining the project to people in person. And I think that is roughly the next month.
Okay.
To set that up.
Okay. Thank you so much. Now I'd like to open it to public comment. I want to remind everyone, Ingrid Williams will be calling out the names. I want to remind everyone that we have 2 minutes on this topic, and also there'll be general public comment at the end of the meeting, so we're requesting that you keep your public comment to each agenda item. So right now we welcome commentary or questions and impressions on the RAND project.
So our first speaker will be Regi Bunch, followed by Nick S.
Good morning, Sheriff Civilian Oversight Commission. I think we're also missing the big elephant in the room here. the fight back power of the Sheriff's Department and the fact that they have the Inspector General under criminal investigation for trying to find particular answers. So I'm curious about a question to Rand about if they are confronted with a criminal investigation for asking questions, how will they be protected? There is that. And two, the bureaucracy with this study, I think, demonstrates how the Sheriff's Department knows that after this study is done, like a kid trying to perform for their parent, will do everything right in a certain time frame, but after that time frame can go back to doing whatever that they were doing. So when Dignity and Power Now fought and founded and was a part of the origin of this commission, we fought to make sure that you all had subpoena power, so that systemically you could keep the Sheriff's Department constantly in check. And so if the county is going to continue investing in periodical studies, every, so often, that does leave space for the Sheriff Department to do whatever that they want to do. So there is a gap there, I think, that's not being talked about. But I'm very curious, though, if Rand knows what they're up against. Because the IG can more than likely go to jail in this criminal investigation. I mean, I'm not saying that to be funny. I'm saying that that's an actual case here. So I'm just curious about that and how folks are going to address that with this study.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, in the 70-year history of RAND, I don't think any of our researchers have been criminally investigated for researching. If that should come to pass, we have an able general counsel's office and would presumably defend accordingly.
Our final speaker for this item, Nick S.
Hey, the guy that was talking over here, you're doing it. You're on the right path. And Rand, I don't know who you guys are talking to. There's gang members in the LA County Sheriffs. There's jump out boys, there's regulators, there's the Vikings. Are we really talking about this? If there's gang members or not? Are you serious? I mean, Tanaka shot somebody to get his tattoo. So when I get arrested, they make me take off my shirt and they take pictures of my tattoos forcefully. So I think the sheriffs that, we're trying to find out if they have gang-related tattoos. Well, what we need to do is do the same thing they do to us when we're in their custody. Make them take off their shirt, take pictures of the tattoos, and explain what they are. Because that's how you're going to find out a lot of information. And, if these sheriffs are killing people, they're shooting people, and they're in a gang, they need gang enhancements. They need me to treat it just like anybody else does when they shoot and murder people. Happens every day. There's times I've been yanked out of a car with my daughter in the car because I was mad dogging somebody. Now listen, I grew up in Carmelito's projects in Long Beach, so we really don't have sheriffs there. We have police department. But right next door is Lakewood Sheriffs, and then we have Compton. And I'm all around those cities doing things every day. And I'm telling you, there's times that I've been in custody where another sheriff rode up to another sheriff car and said, go get a black guy. So, I mean, not only do we got to deal with them being gang members, there's still racists there too. So thank you guys for your time, and you guys are on the right path. These guys, I don't know what the hell they or who they've been talking to, but you guys need to find somebody else if these guys can't do it. 50 years, these guys been gang members. Sheriffs, not all of them. I ain't anti-sheriff, I ain't anti-cop. I'll be honest with you, I tell them hi and hey, how you doing? But they need to be investigated just like we do.
Thank you so much. Is that? That's going to speak public. Okay. Okay. Well, we're going to look forward to getting the periodic updates. I think it's a good suggestion that the ad hoc committee maybe check in. And I want to remind everyone that we do have the ad hoc committee on these deputy gangs / subgroups. We also have what the OIG is working on. So the COC is very invested in getting to the bottom of this with remedies, with policies, with change, right? So, well, I think we're all going in the right direction now. I'm glad that after all this time, it took a really long time for somebody wanted a research project. Now we have it. It took a while, and I'm hoping that the work of the researchers won't take more than the year that they're hoping it to be. But I'm also hoping that the OIG and our ad hoc committee really maintain the sense of urgency that we all have and that you have. So thank you. So let's turn to agenda item 2B. Regarding LASD compliance. We're getting an update regarding AB 392. We have a brief presentation from staff member Eric Montalban, followed by an update from Acting Assistant Sheriff Steve Gross. And I'm going to turn the floor over to our Executive Director, Brian Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In August of this year, Governor Newsom signed the new law of AB 392, which doesn't take effect until January of 2020. But we wanted to check and see, and this involves the use of deadly force by police officers in the state of California. We forwarded a letter to the Sheriff's Department shortly after the governor signed this bill to find out how the Sheriff's Department is preparing to address this new law. So with that, I've asked our staff member, Eric Montalban, to come up and give us a brief update on what AB 392 says, and then we'll hear from Acting Chief Assistant Sheriff Gross, right, on the Sheriff's Department's preparedness for this. Mr. Lara.
Good morning. Good morning, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, Commissioners, Mr. Huntsman, Lauren Black, and Mr. Williams, and last but not least, the Sheriff's Department. So I'm going to provide a brief overview of AB 392. And I mean, we can spend hours talking about this, but I know that members of the public want to make comments. So I will give you the Cliff Notes version, which I'm very familiar with since those are the only books I read in college. So what is AB 392? Well, generally speaking, it revises the standard for the use of deadly force by peace officers. Now, before we can go into what the law actually is going to change, we need to talk about what the law is now. So, what does the law say currently? So, we all know that existing law authorizes a peace officer to make an arrest pursuant to a warrant or based on probable cause. Now, existing law also authorizes a peace officer to use reasonable force to effect an arrest or to prevent an escape or to overcome resistance. Now, under the current law, a homicide is committed by a peace officer. A homicide committed by a peace officer is justified when necessarily committed in arresting a person who has committed a felony or and if a person is fleeing or resisting arrest. So what this means is that a peace officer in California can affirmatively defend shooting and killing a person who poses no threat, and it's just they can be shot mainly because they're not obeying orders. So now this type of homicide is viewed as a seizure under the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. So, and as such, courts and prosecutors apply a reasonable standard. Now, this reasonable standard that prosecutors use was established back in 1989 in the U.S. Supreme Court case of Graham versus Connor. What the court held in Graham is that An objective reasonableness test should be used as a standard to determine whether a peace officer used excessive force in the course of making an arrest or other action. In other words, what would a reasonable peace officer do in the same situation, given what he or she perceives the moment the peace officer pulls the trigger? Now, if a reasonable peace officer would shoot, then the shooting is justified. Now, which brings us to AB 392. What AB 392 does is that it completely changes the law that has governed peace officers' use of deadly force in California, which is Penal Code Sections 196 and 835 small a. Both of these penal codes date back to 1872. And I'm not certain, but I think that I read somewhere in my research that PC Code 196 is the oldest penal code in the nation that has not been changed since its enactment. Now that's 147 years since it hasn't been touched. So what AB 392 does is the language specifies that in California, a peace officer is justified in using deadly force upon another person only when the peace officer reasonably believes, based on the totality of the circumstances, that such force is necessary for either of the following reasons. The first one is to defend against an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury to the peace officer or to another person. And the other is to apprehend a fleeing person for any felony that threatened or resulted in death or serious bodily injury if the peace officer reasonably believes that the person that's fleeing will cause death or serious bodily injury to another, unless immediately apprehended. Now that completely changes the law, because now the law seems to point to, the new law seems to say that before you shoot, let's assess the situation to see if it is justified, where the current law seems to permit a peace officer to shoot and then ask questions later. So that's a big significant change. The new law also states that a peace officer should use deadly force against a person, shall not use deadly force against a person based on the danger that person poses to themselves. So if an objectively reasonable officer would believe that a person does not pose an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury to the peace officer, to another person, then the shooting will not be justified, assuming that the peace officer shoots. Another thing that AB 392 does is it does clarify that de-escalation techniques should be used by law enforcement agencies. In fact, the intent of the legislature is that peace officers use deadly force only when necessary in defense of human life. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but everything that I've read so far regarding AB 392 seems to support saving lives, right? So in determining whether a deadly force is necessary, a peace officer, and this is when for de-escalation. So when determining if if deadly force is necessary, a peace officer shall evaluate each situation in light of the particular circumstances of each case, and shall use other reasonable resources and techniques if reasonably safe and feasible to an objective, reasonable peace officer. Now, I know that there's been a lot of discussion, especially from law enforcement agencies, that this bill is kind of limiting their ability to do their job, but it doesn't really handcuff the officers when performing their duties, because a peace officer who makes or attempts to make an arrest does not need to retreat or desist from making that arrest because of the efforts of the person being arrested. If they are struggling, for example, they do not have to desist. And in fact, that is the current law, and AB 392 does not touch that part of the law. So that part still stays in effect. And also the peace officer will not be deemed an aggressor or lose the right to self-defense by the use of objectively reasonable force to effect the arrest to prevent escape, or to overcome resistance. So, provided that the peace officer's actions are within the new law. Now, another major change that the AB 392 does to current law is that it changes the reasonable standard test that was set in Graham to so it changes the standard set in Graham from a reasonable standard to a necessary standard. And not only does it change that standard, but it also so the current law right now is that prosecutors only analyze what the officer was experiencing at the time that they pulled the trigger. AB 392 changes that in their addition of totality of the circumstances, and then also the fact that the person who is, let's say, the suspect, if they have the ability to commit a threat of death or serious bodily injury, then the shooting would be justified. But absent those two, any shooting done by a peace officer that does not fit this criteria, prosecutors can bring a case against them. Now, there are some definitions in AB 392. So there's a definition for totality of circumstances, which means that all the facts known to the peace officer at the time, including the conduct of the officer and the subject leading up to the use of deadly force. So that encompasses everything that happened in the chase, if there was a chase, or if there's an arrest. All of that is taken into consideration under this new law, where under current law, it did not before. So, and then it also describes what deadly force is. What is missing is a definition of what is necessary, right? Assemblywoman Weber's bill did have that in her original bill. However, through committees and negotiations with the unions, that was removed. And now what is necessary is going to be left up to the courts to decide. So we'll find, so this is just one step in leading towards saving lives. So we won't know for sure how many lives it'll save until after there's a court case, and then a primary definition of necessary is set, and so we won't know exactly how many lives it'll save until then, I guess. So anyway, just to wrap it up, the significant changes in the bill, like I mentioned earlier, is that there will no longer be a reasonable standard test, meaning that if a reasonable officer would find the shooting justified, then the shooting is justified. So now that has been taken off the books, and now we're going to have to analyze the totality of the circumstances, which also includes all the actions that led up to the shooting, including the shooting, and so prosecutors it gives prosecutors, I guess, another tool or avenue to review whether unauthorized use of force was justified or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to hear from Assistant Sheriff Steve Gross.
Good morning. It's an honor to be here with you today in the absence of Under Sheriff Murakami. I'll do the best to answer the questions, and if I don't know the answer to something that you ask me here or later, I'll get back with you on it, report back to you. So the department is aware of AB 392, and we are aware that the bill was signed into law by the governor. The law obviously overrides our policy. We have to follow the law as peace officers. So this bill takes effect in January. The steps that we've done to prepare for that is our Field Operations Support Services has sent out a global email to all employees notifying of upcoming change, and also a link that they can read the actual new law themselves. In the interim, what is occurring is our Field Op Support Services is taking our current policy and comparing and contrasting to the new law and making sure that it's updated to be in alignment with the new law. It's currently at the second level of review. Once that level is finished, then it will come up to the appropriate levels through professional standards and training through chief person here, and then onto our offices at the assistant sheriffs, and ultimately the sheriff to have it signed. So that's currently what we're doing, and we'll be ahead of the law taking effect.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is, I'm gonna open it up for questions from the commissioners. Thank you.
In that regard, is it your expectation that this commission will be able to review your policy on AB 392 before it goes into effect?
So policy goes through review through our department, and I would say that you will be able to see the policy when the policy is done. I don't believe that you are involved in the policy prior to us signing it in final stages.
So basically, it'll be presented as a done deal without our having the ability to have input?
Policy is never a done deal. We can always amend policy. If you have concerns on the policy, then we would take that into consideration.
All right. Thank you.
Any other commissioners? Comments? Yes.
Thank you for being here. Once the policy review is done, how much time will it take to implement any changes on training? And do you, at this point, given what you've seen, anticipate that there will be changes to the actual protocols and training that are provided to deputies?
So our deputies go through continuous professional training. This will be incorporated into our force training, our CPT, and they will be updated on it as they regularly do. They do mandatory training each year under the law.
And do you see that AB 392 will require that type of retraining or changes in training based on what you've known so far about this law?
So it's my opinion that a lot of our new policies that we placed into the department as far as force prevention and de-escalation are already there. So they're actually out in front of this particular policy. The policy deals with the addition of the word necessary in the use of deadly force, which we believe that we would already be in compliance with. However, we don't use that exact word in our policy, so we will add that, and then we will make sure that the deputies are aware. Like the gentleman before briefed, some of this is going to come out in case law as to what the exact definition of necessary is, and we will always update our policies by monitoring the case laws.
I have a question. Clearly, it's a new law, and as you said, the department will follow the law, and you're taking steps in to do that. At this point, because this actually was kicked around a while up in Sacramento and of interest to many people, do you have any sense of that you could share with us of the morale of the department around this? Do you feel that as it's becoming real and better understood and grappled with, do you think that there's going to be resistance? Do you think there's going to be, because of the position that leadership takes, that there will be, that this law will be led to reassure the rank and file? Because obviously when you have a change like this, people are going to have a lot of opinions about it. You have to do some things differently. It's anxiety producing. What's my job like now? Those kinds of things. Is there anything you can share about how you and other leaders are planning to lead the employees on this new law?
So we will embrace the new law. I don't anticipate any morale issues over it or any problems with the law. Like I had said, we have been, ever since going back to the CCJV, where we put force prevention and de-escalation into our policy. These are things that are pretty standard for us at this point. Obviously, our department members have to have a reverence for human life, and they have to be able to justify why they, in fact, engage in deadly force. I would disagree with the other gentleman, the fact that we are legally allowed to shoot people because they don't comply with our orders. It's not quite that simple. All deputies have to be able to justify what they do, and then that goes through our very rigorous review process that involves the OIG's oversight and the DA's office and our own internal investigations. So there's multiple steps to ensuring that shootings are within policy and within the law.
All right. Thank you for that. Any other commissioner questions? Okay. Okay, so what we'd like to do is open this up for comments from the public.
We have one.
One?
Adriana Wong.
Good morning, Adriana Wong with the ACLU of Southern California. We were one of the many co-sponsors of AB 392. I was frankly hoping to hear a little bit more from the sheriff about what in particular they're doing to change their policy, to bring it in line with AB 392. That ties into my general concern about the perhaps lack of transparency about the steps that the sheriff's office is taking to come to compliance with the bill. I'm concerned that this commission won't see the policy until it's final. I'm concerned that there appear to be no steps taken to involve the community in the process of advising or consulting or giving input on how to come into compliance with the bill, especially considering that many of the co-sponsors are based in Los Angeles. I would also disagree with the idea that the only thing that needs to be changed is the word necessary, or that the policy is already in compliance. In addition to changing the reasonableness standard in the policy to a necessary standard, there's no provision requiring the officer's conduct leading up to the use of force to be considered in the current policy. The provision on when deadly force can be used against fleeing persons has to be rewritten completely to come into compliance with AB 392. There's nothing that mentions the danger that someone poses to themselves, whether that can be an authorization for deadly force in the current policy. I would also just take issue, in general, I agree with the characterization of the bill that the commission's staff member presented, but I would take issue with the idea that the definition of the word necessary is up to the courts. The word necessary is already used in the guiding principles for the Sheriff's Department's use of force policy. Additionally, we all know what the word necessary means. It means when there's no other way to do something. That's apparent in the legislative intent. That's apparent in the plain definition and the dictionary definition. And I think it would be clearer guidance to deputies and better compliance with AB 392 if that definition was taken up in the policy right now instead of waiting for some court decision down the line. Thank you.
One more speaker.
Okay.
Andres Kwan.
Andres Kwan, lawyer with the ACLU. If I was a betting man, I would bet the Sheriff's Department will try to implement AB 392, or rather utterly fail to do so, just as it has utterly failed to implement SB 1421, which under this law, the Sheriff's Department now has to disclose information, now public, relating to use of force, sustained findings of sexual assault, and dishonesty. The LA County Civil Grand Jury recently recommended that law enforcement agencies immediately provide SB 1421 information. The Sheriff's Department responded to the County Board of Supervisors that they have implemented this recommendation. To us, only in an alternate reality would it be true that they have implemented SB 1421. Instead, they have completely refused to respond to PRA requests. The day SB 1421 went into effect, January 1st, the ACLU sent the same PRA request to about 300 agencies across the state. Our Sheriff's Department in LA is one of only a handful of agencies to not turn over a single document under SB 1421 to this day, and we're September 17 today. Not only that, when the Sheriff's Department gets a request, it appears that it gives the deputy the opportunity to review the documents for about a week or possibly more before the documents are released, if they are released. In light of the Sheriff's Department order failure, we urge the COC to help the board draft an ordinance requiring the sheriff to disclose information now public under SB 1421 proactively on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you. Well, clearly, this is a major shift. There was, I think we just heard that has been a change like this in 140 years. So it's going to, so if things have been a certain way for a very, very long time, there's going to be lots of issues surrounding it. Lots of leadership is going to be needed. Lots of oversight is going to be needed. Certainly, the public community is going to be weighing in and watching very closely. I think this is something that was negotiated pretty fiercely to make this change and go in this direction. So that this is where we are. January 1st is approaching soon. So we will definitely be interested in seeing how the Sheriff's Department, rolls this out, the changes you make. We look forward to seeing your policy. And then, of course, we won't be shy in giving some input if necessary. And certainly the community will be engaged. So, we're moving ahead on a really big shift. So thank you for everyone who's commented today.
I have an additional question. For the sheriff, has the department reached out to community groups to get input? I mean, we had the two speakers from the ACLU. Ms. Wong spoke particularly rationally about the necessity of involvement. So what is the sheriff's position regarding taking input from the community on the policy?
I think we have to be clear here. We have to follow the law as the Sheriff's Department. We can't write policy that is in conflict with the law or overrides the law. So the law as it's written is what we must follow. The policy is to give our personnel guidance on how and where the law is. But the reality is what the law said is what we must do. So as far as getting opinions about how to follow the law and those types of things, I was merely referencing the fact that we do have policy as far as how we're using force and how we go up about as far as force prevention or for de-escalation procedures that is now consistent with what the law is going to be. But the bottom line is, if we wrote no policy, we would have to follow this exact law. So that should be taken into consideration. It's not like we have the ability to maneuver around the law. So whether a policy is done or not, this will be the law. Come January 1st, there's no way around it, and we will be required to follow it.
If I can just follow up, in terms of understanding what the law is, has the Sheriff's Department worked with the District Attorney's Office in discussing the policy issue to comply with the law?
So we have a team of force experts that are policy writers in this regard. They will reach out to the people they normally reach out to, which can be the District Attorney's Office and other force experts, as well as people in force science and all different avenues of how we apply our force and training and policy to make sure that we not only have policy consistent, but that we're able to provide the training so our deputies understand the law. Because the policy really is about our deputies understanding the change to the law, not so much us following the law. That's what it's there for, is to tell the deputies this new law has occurred and how we're going to get them to follow the law.
Okay, so as far as you know, the sheriff and the district attorney have not had meetings on the subject?
As far as I know, we have not.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. We're going to move up our break a little bit. We're going to take a 15-minute break now, and we will reconvene with agenda item 2C, which is the OIG presentation on the Inmate Welfare Fund. We'll be back in 15.